The Bible has so many facets like a diamond does, where you can look at it one way and it's beautiful, and you hold it another and it's even more beautiful still. So, not the actual book, but the stories inside. And when Jesus, when he spoke stories, when he told stories, they were for everyone. He was able to craft a story so that way the old would appreciate the story as well as the young, and the rich would find something for them as well as the poor, and the simple as well as the brainy, all were enthralled with these stories that Jesus would tell. And he's a perfect master storyteller. It's incredible what he would write. Well, last week, I presented the first part of a two-part series of story that's found in Luke chapter 15. These are sermons that are, people on YouTube, they do covers of songs. Well, this is a cover of a sermon that I from Alistair Begg, just an incredible Bible teacher, and they were so powerful for me that I just wanted to share my version of these sermons for you. So this story begins about the prodigal son. Actually, begins in Luke 14. It says that on one Sabbath day, after they had all come back from synagogue, Jesus was invited to eat at a Pharisee's home. And in fact, this was the home of the head Pharisee. So this is a very important guy that had invited him. They all came to that house. They took off their shoes, and they all sat down for the meal. And all the guests, though, they kept their eyes on Jesus. They kept their eyes on Jesus, watching his every move. Now, why would they do this? Because Jesus was famous. He always told the best stories. And the crowds constantly flocked around him, and they hung on his every word. He performed healing miracles in the streets to thousands of people. It was even rumored that he fed 5,000 men, plus women and children, with one little tiny lunch. Jesus wasn't all fun and stories to the Pharisees, though. On many occasions, his stories included rebukes aimed right at them. And Jesus actually shamed quite a few of their well-respected members of their group. And now here he was eating among them. Would he do a miraculous thing in front of them? Or would he give a stern rebuke instead? They all waited and watched to see. After the prayer and after everyone got into the potluck line, of course, Jesus saw that there was a man who had wandered in off the streets. And he noticed how everyone's attention started to be focused on him, but then not so much on him, but on this man that wandered in. Not so much because he cut in line, but because his legs and his ankles were unusually swollen. They were almost filled with water or liquid of some kind, and so he drew attention. And when Jesus noticed that they were all looking at that man, Jesus spoke. He said, "I have a question for you. Is it lawful to heal someone on the Sabbath or not?" And nobody said anything back. They just stayed silent, watching. And so he turned to this man, he healed him, restored him back to complete health, and then he sent him away. And he asked the Pharisees this time, if your son falls into a ditch, or even if your ox or your car, rolls into a ditch, aren't you going to pull it out even if it's on the Sabbath day? And they just kept silent, holding their empty plates in their hands. And as they went through line and they headed back to the table, Jesus noticed that they were vying for the places of honor next to the head Pharisee at the banquet table. So Jesus told them to sit at the lowest spot on the table, not at the head, unless they want to make that walk of shame when the host says, "Hey, excuse me, could you maybe find another seat? I want to talk to this other person instead." And with shame, they walk back down to the bottom of the table. Then Jesus not only talks to the guests, but he turns to the host. And he said, "When you hold a feast next time, invite the poor instead of your rich neighbors, the stranger instead of your friends, because they can't repay you in any way, and God will be the one to repay you on the resurrection day." And while they were eating, one of the heavenly-minded guests, he looked around and he saw how all of his buddies were around, and he just said, "Well, I can't wait until we eat at the banquet table of God." And so then Jesus tells a story of guests who were all invited to a great banquet. And they each began in turn to make excuses for why they couldn't come. And they were dumb excuses. They were lame excuses, made up excuses. And the host insisted that people come to his banquet. And so he told his servants to go out into the highways and byways, into every street corner, and compel people to come in. So that way his banquet could be filled and people could enjoy the meal that he prepared. And then he says at the end that those that were invited wouldn't even come in to taste it. And then Jesus closes these stories with dealing with the cost, what people must give up in order to be free to be disciples of God, of him. And then he finishes these stories in chapter 14 about the kingdom to the Pharisees with this plea: "Let those who have ears, let them hear." Now in chapter 15 of Luke, it explains, Luke 15, it says, "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to him," to Jesus. "And the Pharisees and scribes grumbled, saying, 'This man receives sinners and eats with them?'" Duh. I mean, his whole purpose was to call sinners to repentance, Luke 5:32. So of course he's going to meet with them, and of course he's going to eat with them. But all the Pharisees could think was, "I wish these sinners would just quit crowding around our potluck." Have you ever been to churches like that? Been to a few. And so as he sees the Pharisees react this way, Jesus begins to tell these three stories. First, he tells about a sheep that gets lost, one of 100. And as he tells this, it's not like the sheep fell into a ditch, because then you know where the sheep is, right? But it gets lost someplace out in the wilderness. And the Pharisees are listening to the story, and some of them are like, it's one of 100. At least I'd still have 99. So they were listening a whole lot to that. And so Jesus recognizes this, and he raises the stakes a bit. And then he tells a story about a woman who lost 1 out of 10 coins. For the jaded, for the callous, for the stubborn-minded, for the hard-hearted, who might not care about 1 sheep. They might care about 1 lost coin, because with a coin, maybe you could buy a few sheep, But some Pharisees were like, it's still 1 in 10. At least I'd still have 9. Whatever. So then Jesus raises it even further, and he says, "What about a lost son? 1 of 2. Oh, then he had their attention. It says, beginning in verse 11, "And he said, 'There was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger of them went off, took all that he had, all of the half of his father's property, and he went off as far as he could into a far country, and he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in the country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed pigs. And at this, the Pharisees, they're thinking, what a bad son. What a bad person. What a terrible, immoral, unrighteous person. And he was longed to be fed with the pods and the pigs that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. Ha ha, serves him right. And the son said, I have sinned against heaven and before you. Yeah, you have. And I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. No, he's not. But then they hear Jesus say that this young man, he gets up and he goes back to his father. And while he was still a long way off, the father goes out to meet him and hugs him. What? And kisses him. No. And gives him a robe. That's not fair. And gives him a ring. That's not fair. And gives him sandals on his feet. That's not fair. And throws him a party. That's not fair. And it says in verse 25 that his older son was in the field. He was working. He was working for the father out in the field, and he came and drew near to the house, and he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. I have a question for you. Think about this. Why didn't he just go inside to figure it out for himself? It's his home. It's his house. He lives there. Maybe he didn't go inside because that thing that he thought, he dreaded, could maybe someday happen, had happened. That his long-lost brother had come back. Yeah, he would. He would come back like this. He would waste it all and come back like this. And he couldn't come back quietly either. He's useless. He always has been, always will be, using up the family's resources. I'm not going to participate in any of this. You see that the son did not care when his brother left home for the first time. When his father paced the floor, the son said, good riddance. He didn't share in the father's anxiety when his brother first left. So when his brother returned, he couldn't share in the father's joy. But this story has 2 points. That God isn't just trying to reach those who are outside the church, wandering and squandering their life away, estranged from God, away from their Heavenly Father. But it's also a story about the Father reaching out to those that are in the church that study their Sabbath school lesson. My question for you right now is, think back over your life. Is there somebody in your life who you deem as least worthy to get to go to heaven? Is there someone in your life that they are least worthy of getting in there? Someone who really ruined your life, maybe. What if after we all get to heaven and we walk through those pearly gates up that street of gold, and we stand there and we see this banquet table that stretches for miles and miles and miles for the redeemed of God to sit at. And we all file into that potluck line that also stretches for miles and miles and miles, because of course there's going to be potluck in heaven. And you're standing in this long line and you see all these faces, and suddenly you hear a commotion from the front of the line, and you hear this voice say, "Oh, so-and-so, come sit by me, sit by me." And you pull an angel aside and you say, "Excuse me, what's all this commotion that I hear? What's all this stuff that I hear going on up at the front?" And the angel says, well, don't you know? So-and-so, they repented the last 6 months of their life. And so God, through this whole banquet, this whole celebration, to celebrate that they are here for all eternity. Isn't that wonderful? And you think, so-and-so? So-and-so? is here. So-and-so, they did such and such to me. So-and-so. Do you resonate with the older brother yet? Just a little bit. Have you ever heard that someone that you knew back in the day, back, when you were growing up or back in high school or college or something, that you heard that they had been baptized and were active in their church community? And you think, them? If they only knew, they only knew the stories. That person baptized, they don't deserve to be baptized. Consider how in the previous chapter in Luke 14, those that were invited to this great banquet would rather stay in the outer darkness than come in to celebrate. They would not even taste the banquet. And it's not so much an angry threat of the master of the feast, but rather a matter of fact. They would not taste my banquet. How sad. That's just sad. For some excuse. Those that stay at home, staying in the Father's house, are doing the Father's will. They're being the good sons and daughters. That they would rather stay outside in the darkness than go inside to celebrate with him. To celebrate that grace and mercy had been given to someone who did not deserve it. And so in the story you have this well-crafted story, you have the bad son, the quote-unquote bad son, inside the party being celebrated, and the good son on the outside of the party refusing to celebrate. And so the father, who loves them both, he goes out to where the eldest son is, standing in the cold and the darkness, and he says, "Why won't you come in?" No, I won't go in. Lo, look, verse 29, look, these many years I have served you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when the son of yours, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him. Look, I'm the good son. When I go into town, the people tell me, well, at least your father got one good son. I'm the good one. I'm the good son. I'm the one that stayed. I'm the one that's been slaving away for you. But then this son of yours comes crawling back and you throw him a party? And the father responds just bewildered. What? So, is that what you think you've been doing for me all these years? Slaving away for me? The eldest son in this story at this moment shows his true colors. It shows that he stayed at home and did the will of the Father, obeyed the word of the Father so that he could get the gifts that would be coming to him. He was just as focused on the inheritance as was his younger brother. He didn't obey the Father out of love, but out of hope for reward. Do you feel that God owes you anything? Have you ever, when bad things happened in your life or in the life of somebody else, did you ever say something like, well, she didn't deserve that. He deserves better. The point is that none of us get what we deserve. And praise God that we don't get what we deserve. What the rebellious son got from his father, he didn't deserve. And that's what the older son didn't like. But the father is still pleading with his self-righteous son also. Verse 31, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours." Son, you've been with me the whole time. You've been here the whole time through all these years that your brother has been away from the family and alone. You and I have been together. Haven't we been grown closer? Haven't we had special memories together? And is that all you're concerned about, a goat? You could have just asked. Everything that I have is yours. You could have just asked me. And to both his sons, this father in both of their minds is an exacting slave driver. Because the younger son, he comes back and he says, please make me a hired servant. And the older said, I've been slaving away for you all these years. They are both his sons, and neither understands the love of the Father for them. The one that leaves, nor the one that stays. I am no longer worthy. What should I do for God to what should I give to God for him to be happy with me? Should I pay my tithe or the full 10%? Will that finally make him happy with me? Maybe if I add offering on top of that 10%. What if I go be a missionary for a year? What if I take 7 years and I'm a missionary? What if I preach to thousands of people on the street corner of Hollywood Boulevard and Vine, just stand there as everyone walks by? What do I have to do to make him happy with me? But he has shown you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with him. Micah 6. The contrast in this story is not between the bad son and the good son. It's not a contrast between the son that did right and the son that did wrong. It's a contrast between the son that realized that he was in need of mercy and the son that felt like he had no need of mercy at all. He could see why his younger brother, this son of yours, needs grace, but not me. Not me. I haven't killed anyone. I'm not a bad person. I'm not a monster. I'm not a rebel. You have to admit that the older son did have a better quality of life staying at home. He didn't have the scars. He didn't have to suffer the hardship that the other son had. The older brother represents the Pharisees because they did what was right and kept the law and did it well. But the other group, the sinners that Jesus was talking to, also viewed it more like, we've broken the law so many times that there's no way in heaven that we could ever get in. So why even try to keep the law? It's hopeless now. And so the Pharisees saw that these people on the outside were sinners. But then us that identify with the prodigal son, why would we look at our older brothers and sisters and hate them back because they hated us instead of just being deeply sad? They stayed next to God that whole time, and yet they're just as far away from him. And you see, sin is not just acts of disobedience, but it's a spirit of rebellion against the father. The older son had a heart of rebellion against his father, different than his brothers, but rebellion just the same. Not my brother, the son of yours. And if you deny your relationship to the people from the opposite side, if we say the son of yours, then we are proving that we are not sons or daughters. We're just hired help in the house of God. We're not really part of his family. And if you know that you are a son, if you know that you are a daughter of God, that makes every repentant sinner your brother, and it makes every church-going, Bible-toting sister your sister. And with those terms of closest relation, God is calling us to consider each other. And isn't it fitting then to celebrate and be glad when sinners crowd around to hear about heaven? The one who returns will have the seat of honor at the head of the 99 who stayed at home. Jesus, the master storyteller, he finishes this story open-ended. He doesn't tell you what happened because, in fact, the story is not yet finished. It's not a story about a person, someone that 2,000 years ago stayed at home or went away. It's a story about you. It's a story about me. It's your story. It's my story. And so I ask you, how will this story end? And will you go into the party?